Greetings, everyone. Greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome all of you to this much anticipated conversation between two great intellectuals, Dr. Tariq Ramadan from Oxford University, the author of many books, including Radical Reform, Islamic Ethics and Liberation, and our very own Professor Eric Gregory, who teaches here in the Religion Department and is also the author of many works, including The Politics of Love. We are really honored to have both of these scholars agree to be in conversation with one another before us. My name is Sohaib Sultan, and I serve as the Muslim chaplain in the Office of Religious Life, and the program that is putting this event together today is called the Muslim Life Program. And the Muslim Life Program started about 3 years ago, and one of its stated goals was to bring entire communities in conversation and in dialogue with one another. And so, by the grace of God, we've been able to do that throughout these past 3 years, and I think it's fair to say that this will be one of those occasions where we can say that we are able to build some bridges here between particularly two faith traditions, Muslims and Christians, two faith traditions that represent over half of the human population and who are in need of much conversation in this day and age. I would just like to welcome you all here and to welcome the program, but essentially what I want to do is I want to hand it off to my colleague, my good friend, my mentor, my office neighbor for at least a couple of more weeks, Paul Rauschenbusch. Dean Paul Rauschenbusch is the Associate Dean of Religious Life here at Princeton University. He is the senior editor of the Huffington Post Religion section, and we are very sad for us that he is going to move on in another couple of weeks to work full-time for Huffington Post in New York. But we are very happy for him, and we're very happy for the religious dialogue in America that Paul is taking this position. But I just want to say very personally how much we're going to miss Paul at the university and how much he's contributed to the community here. It is under his leadership, as well as that of Dean Allison Bowden and Dean Deborah Blanks, that we have the Muslim Life Program, that we have the Hindu Life Program, and so religious diversity has really thrived under their leadership. So we wish Paul the best, and we're very honored that one of his final public moments will be here in this conversation between Tariq Ramadan and Eric Gregory on religion and the problem of oppression. Thank you all for coming, and I'd like to now welcome my dear colleague, my dear friend, Paul Rauschenbusch.
Before I begin, I do want to mention what a blessing it is, and hopefully will be for a long time, to have Sohaib Sultan as our coordinator of Muslim Life and our Muslim chaplain. He has added so much to our collective life at the university. He's a wonderful resource. And so on behalf of all of us in the Office of Religious Life, and I believe I can speak this one time on behalf of the MSA and the GMSA, I'd like to offer him a round of applause in appreciation for all of his hard work in making this happen. It is a great honor to be in the same vicinity as such great scholars and men and prophetic witnesses in both of their traditions. And so I'm going to offer a few brief remarks, and then I look forward as eagerly as any of you to hearing their remarks. One of the most recognizable phrases in American religious rhetoric is attributed to Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." In this proclamation, we hear two important testimonies. First, that there is a direction to history, and therefore a director, or God, who wills this moral arc. Second, that this arc bends towards justice, which means that God, the architect of the universe, wills justice for the world. The fact of oppression is not contested. Whether you are in central Jersey or in Oxford or anywhere in the world that you care to look with open eyes, you will find suffering that is the result of human action or inaction. Suffering and oppression are a fact. Today we are gathered to hear from two remarkable professors on religion and the problem of oppression. Professor Ramadan and Professor Gregory will be offering us an introduction into the ethical claims of two of the world's largest religions, Islam and Christianity. There are a lot of ways this conversation can go. And one of the reasons to come to an event like this is that it is live, and it invites the unexpected. Talking about religion and oppression is fraught, and fingers almost ache to be pointed at examples in both traditions when religion offered not only a response to oppression, but was the cause of it. We not only are tempted to point the fingers inward, but outward. That said, I can tell you how I hope this afternoon's conversation will go. That we learn from Professor Ramadan and Professor Gregory deep insights into their religious understanding of the problem of oppression, as well as inspiration for the ways that these two great faith traditions might work both individually and together to find common purpose in confronting oppression. Today, we will likely hear a great deal about evil and sin, both individual and collective, but hopefully we will also hear about redemption and reconciliation. This afternoon will be well served if all of us leave here with more trust, hope, and understanding of both of these two traditions, and if each of us leave determined to do our part to move a little bit further along that arc that bends towards justice. I am now going to offer two woefully brief, but because of the stature of these people, they're almost like obvious. So you're like, and there they are. But I'm going to mention a few things that each of them have accomplished so that we truly appreciate what's in store for us. Professor Tariq Ramadan holds an MA in philosophy and French literature and a PhD in Arabic and Islamic studies from the University of Geneva. He is a professor of contemporary Islamic studies at Oxford University, and he also teaches in the Faculty of Theology. Through his writings and lectures, he has contributed to the debate on contemporary Islamic issues, Islamic revival in the world, and Muslims in the West. He is active both at the academic and grassroots level, lecturing extensively throughout the world on theology, Islamic law, and jurisprudence, applied ethics, philosophy, social justice, economy, politics, and interfaith and intercommunity dialogue. He is currently the president of the European think tank, European Muslim Network in Brussels. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Professor Ramadan to Princeton. Professor Eric Gregory is much beloved in this community and joined the faculty in 2001 and was promoted to full professor in 2009. He is the author of Politics in the Order of Love, an Augustinian Ethic of Democratic Citizenship. His interests include religion and philosophical ethics, theology, public theory, law and religion, and the role of religion in public life. A graduate of Harvard College, he earned an MPhil and diploma in theology from the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar and his doctorate in religious studies from Yale University. Among his current projects is a book tentatively titled, What Do We Owe Strangers? Globalization and the Good Samaritan, which examines secular and religious perspectives on global justice. Brothers and sisters, let us be very thankful for Eric Gregory tonight. This afternoon, both scholars will be offering a 15-minute introduction to their thoughts. And then they will follow that with an engaged conversation between the two of them. I look forward to it as anxiously as anyone here. We will start with Professor Ramadan.
Thank you, Paul, for this introduction. And as you thank Sohaib and all the people who are working with him, I want also to thank him and all the people that I met, because I know that behind the scene there are lots of young students that are helping and doing the job. So thank you for helping this to happen and for this invitation. And of course, Eric, that I have met for the first time over lunch, and we now have already decided that it's not the first and the only one that we are going to meet, but try to do things together on the field of ethics, God willing. Let me go straight to the point, because 15 minutes as an introduction to this topic is just to come with the outline, and then we will have a discussion. Two things that I wanted to say as a starting point when it comes to what we heard just after September the 11th in the United States of America is the first reaction coming from the President Bush was to speak about crusades, and then he said, no. At the end, what we have to understand that Islam is a religion of peace, just to make the Muslims happy. This was an understanding. But I think that if we speak about Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any spirituality, just to say it's a religion of peace, it's not enough. If you are a religion of peace, it means that you have to deal with violence. All the religions are dealing with violence, because human beings, by definition, are dealing with violence. A human being is someone who is going to deal with violence. This is within our nature. So when we speak about religion of peace, it means that somewhere in the theory, in the practice, in the understanding of the very essence of our religion, we are going to speak about violence. How to manage this? Do we accept it? Do we reject it? And how we are going to deal with this? And when it comes to oppression or injustice, it's all together. This is where we have to deal with it. And oppression is a kind of, it could be a symbolic, it could be a physical, it could be a collective violence done to yourself intimately or done to other people. So we have to deal with it. Now the second point is when it comes to the Islamic tradition, and I want to speak from within the Islamic tradition, because this is where we'll have the discussion from the center, the heart of our respective tradition. When it comes to oppression and violence and resistance and justice, the word that you were referring to and speaking also about the devil, there is something that is very important in the Islamic tradition. When we start talking about this, we need to come to two things that are essential. In fact, we need to come back to the very understanding of the concept of human being. You need to get the sense of what is a human being when you are going to speak about oppression, when you are going to speak about violence and peace and justice. So it's starting there. So there is nothing which is clear when it comes to the collective dimension if you don't get a sense of what it means when it comes to human being, the concept of human being. The second thing, which is the very nature of life. If you look and read the Quran and you understand what is said in the Quran, the overall message is you have to deal with violence, oppression, and injustice because this is the very nature of life. And God is expecting from you to educate yourself to go from injustice to justice, from natural struggle to peace. This is the way of the spiritual life, intimately and collectively. So let me come to this understanding, and very often when I'm trying to explain the way we have to deal with oppression, the way we have to deal on an ethical ground with anything which has to do with violence, to come to the inner dimension, the intimate dimension, because this is going to help us understand how we deal with it on a collective level. And there is something which is clear in the Islamic tradition, and for the Muslims, in fact, is the universal intimate dimension, that we find it every one of us, that if we look at ourselves, we look at the way we are not naturally at peace with our own self. When it comes to the spiritual teaching, look at yourself, and in yourself you will find two different trends. The first one is this love for peace, generosity. You like it. You are attracted by the truth. You are attracted by generosity, by giving. This is something that we like. And we have it in the Quran, وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانِ. That you like it, that you like this faith, that there is something which is positive. But at the same time, we are attracted by other things. Oppression, violence, greediness, selfishness. The dark side of ourself, it's there. We can lie to the people we love the most. Our mother, our father, we are ready. This is it. And the first attitude of the child is to be selfish. He or she has to educate, or to be educated, to go from natural selfishness to educated generosity. These dimensions, these two dimensions, this is the natural reality of human being. This is what we get in ourselves. And in fact, the first thing is, be careful. You can be oppressed by the dark side of yourself. You can be oppressed by your instincts. You can be oppressed by your selfishness. You can be oppressed by your ego. The first jail is your ego. So in fact, you have to resist this potential oppression. And this is why you have something in the intimate dimension with a very individual supplication that we have towards God is, Allahumma dhalamna anfusana. We have been unjust with our own self. Why? Because we let this dark dimension take over, and we have to resist. This resistance within, it's a necessity. You are not going to be a human being. You are not going to be at peace with yourself if you don't solve this intimate struggle. And this intimate struggle is resist with your qualities and use your enlightened side to the dark side of yourself. So there is a natural resistance. You know how we call it in Arabic? Jihad in nafs. Jihad. So this is the word that you have in the media. It's all about war. And in fact, you get it now. In fact, it's the opposite. Is the way you go from natural tensions to a spiritual peace. In fact, jihad is the way towards peace, not the way towards war. It's to go from a natural state of war to a spiritual state of peace. That is, in Christianity, in Judaism, in all the traditions, we are talking exactly the same language. And to do this is an educational process, which is important. And you said something which is important. At the end of the day, the peace that we want to achieve is a reconciliation between the two polarizations that we have in ourselves, how to control the dark side to be with the enlightened side at peace with our own self, reconciling ourselves with the very essence of our being. This is what a jihad is. And now you get, and this is the point for me which is important in the whole process, is to understand that this way towards peace, it's a necessity. Human beings are like this. And in fact, we don't share with the Greek tradition something which is the body is bad and the soul is good. No, the body can be good or bad. The soul can be good and bad, depend on your intention. It's your decision to make it right or good. Your body is not intrinsically bad. There is nothing bad in sexuality. It depends how you go for it. There is nothing bad in the way that you have desires. It depends how you go with them. Are you following them? Are you controlling them? Nothing bad in emotions. It depends how you deal with your emotions. Are they controlling you? Are you controlling them? So spirituality is about that. It's a natural, it's a necessity of life. If you want to avoid struggling with your own self, you are not going to get a spiritual life. Spirituality is about controlling, mastering, a discipline with your own self, heart, mind, body, soul, everything. It's a comprehensive approach. Having said that, now we come to the collective dimension, and exactly the same. Why? Because you will find that among the people, you have people who are going to be driven by their instincts, and they are going to be driven much more by their emotions and their will for power. You have to resist the oppressor and the potential oppressors. Why? Because this is a necessity. And look at this verse. There is something which is wanted by God from the very beginning, which is a great opportunity for human beings, is diversity. Diversity is an opportunity or a risk at the same time. An opportunity, why? Because this is the way you are going to know other people. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We made you tribes and nations in order for you to know each other. So this is the opportunity, more knowledge. And through this, you get two things, more knowledge and humility. Why? Because when you meet with others, they are sending you a message, you are not alone. You don't get it all. You are trying your best, but there are other people. Diversity is the way towards humility, and humility is the way towards spirituality. This is one positive side. But there is the other one, which is diversity is the risk of war, conflicts. And it's a necessity as well. You have it in the Quran, وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضِ. If God had not put a set of people against another set of people, the world would have been corrupt. Why? This diversity, this power struggle is a necessity of life. More importantly, we have exactly the same verse talking about religions, not only about tribes and nations. It's وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَهُدِّمَتْ صَوَامِعُ وَبِيَعٌ وَصَلَوَاتٌ وَمَسَاجِدُ يُذْكَرُ فِيهَا اسْمُ اللَّهِ كَثِيرًا. And this is where, without this set of people struggling against a set of people, you would have temples, churches, synagogues, and mosques being destroyed. Meaning by this diversity is a necessity, and the risk is war, and you have to manage this. This is why I'm telling you, if you speak about peace, you have to speak about violence and potential conflicts. How are you going to manage this? And this is where in Islam, the point is that it's legitimate, and there is a legitimacy to resist oppression when it comes to you. There is a necessity. Why? You will find on your way people who are going to colonize you, people who are going to get on your land for money, for power, for wealth. And if they don't respect your rights, it's legitimate to resist. Because if you let them do, you're not going towards peace. You are going towards injustice, exploitation, and at the end, corruption. So for you to get justice, you need to understand that justice is about balance. And balance is about legitimate resistance towards oppression. There is something which is legitimate resistance. As in your side, it's legitimate to resist the dark side of yourself. And it's a necessity. So this is where you can sit and say, I am for peace, and when someone is coming, you let him do, or you let the society, or you let the colonizers, or you let the people do whatever they want. Now, who is going to decide the means with which you are going to resist? Nelson Mandela said once, at the end of the day, the means are always decided by the oppressors. If they come with an armed oppression, they are deciding the way you are going to resist. It's not the oppressed who are going to decide firsthand. Now you can have a spiritual, take by saying, no, we are not going to resist the way you are attacking. For example, in Yemen recently, during the uprisings, just after the Friday prayer, we got someone saying, we are going to demonstrate. And if they come with weapons, we have weapons, but you are not going to use them. We are going to go without weapons. Come and kill us if you want, but we are not going. So there is a spiritual take on it. It's legitimate to resist with weapons when you are going to be killed with weapons, because the oppressor is deciding. But you have also to get a sense which kind of ethical ground are you going to take. And this is the discussion which is between the legitimate, just way of resisting and this spiritual. And this is why you have in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ, which is, God commands justice. Justice means, come, you decide the means, we are going to resist with the same means. And we have this in the Quran, respond the same way you have been oppressed. We have it in the Quran. But sometimes you have to go beyond this and to get the best way, which sometimes could be non-violent mass protests, are stronger than only resisting with weapons, because your weapons could be your number. You need to find the strategies. Having said that, and coming to the conclusion, the point that I wanted to make here is that there could be a philosophy of non-violence resistance, while we need to understand that from an Islamic viewpoint, oppression is going to be there because this is the very nature of life. That you are going to have societies oppressing other societies, that you are going to have human beings oppressing human beings. This is the very nature of life, and it's legitimate for the sake of peace to resist, and jihad is this tension first that you have, resisting oppression to get peace beyond that, because there is no peace without justice. Does it mean that you have to stop there and to idealize and to worship justice? No. To worship justice could be also something which is a very difficult. Justice is but a means, is not to be worshipped. You have to get the sense that a condition of peace is justice, but you have sometimes to go beyond the condition to get a peace with forgiveness and compassion and reconciliation. That also is a very important thing. And the last point here is just to say something. Having said that, there is an ethics of war when it comes to the way you resist and the means that you are using. And if you come to the Islamic tradition, very quickly we have an ethics of war. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, was sending a troop in the north, and then he passed away, and then Abu Bakr sent Usama, they were told, look, you go there, and it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a battle. You are resisting their oppression. But never you touch women, children, religious people, and fruits, trees, and in civilians. You don't touch these people. You don't touch the innocent. So there is an ethics of war. You resist to the people who are attacking you, but no collateral damages. In any way, even with nature. You have to respect nature. And this is something which is very important. So sometime in our situation, I will end up here, we are facing with the legitimacy of resistance without getting the legitimacy of the means. Is legitimate, for example, this is what I said when I was talking to the American embassy in Switzerland by saying your war in Iraq is a mistake. It's illegal, it's wrong. So they were saying, what are you saying? Is it legitimate to resist? I say yes. I disagree with the means, which is to kill innocent people, but I agree with the fact that they have to resist because what you are doing is oppressing people. You go where you don't have to go. They were not pleased with that. But you can imagine. And then I disappeared from here for 6 years. But I'm always repeating, not to come to the States under the Bush administrations is an honor much more than anything else. Having said that, for us is really this, which is an important ethical discussion, and this is where, with our friends and brothers in humanity from the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, this is where we need something which is an ethics of war and the way we are dealing with oppression, because we can't just take a stand of non-violence when people are oppressed. We have to push this and to come, yes, okay, non-violence, but what are the conditions and how can we promote this attitude? Thank you.
It is a pleasure to be here with Professor Ramadan, and I very much look forward to our conversation, as I know all of you do. I'm also grateful to the Muslim Life program and want to extend my gratitude to Sohab Sultan for putting together what I told him was the most postered event in the history of Princeton University. Professors are trained to speak for 50 minutes. You can wind us up, but I'm going to stick to my 20 minutes, I was told. And I'm really grateful for the program for sponsoring this. Universities historically have been the sites for interreligious dialogue. And I don't think this happens as much as it should. It is a risky enterprise, often tempting us to see others only in light of our own beliefs and practices, emphasizing sameness, or emphasizing difference, tempting us to demonize others, portraying them only as what we most fear. I think it takes a lot of work to avoid trivial generalization, even when similarities do exist, say an emphasis on the virtues of compassion and justice, monotheism, rejection of idolatry, or even more technically, as I've been reading Professor Ramadan's work, distinctions between legal precedents from the principles or aims of the law, something in the Christian tradition often seen as distinguishing the spirit from the letter of the law. Both of our traditions are also trying to think about how to appeal to social science, the empirical parts of the university, philosophy, and trying to help our religious traditions concretize these visions of justice. For some, religious diversity makes us more aware of our own particular identity, maybe enriched by the encounter with others, learning not just about their views, but perhaps about ourselves. But at the same time, for others, globalization and anxiety about religious difference can reduce our multiple identities into a flat description. Professor Ramadan has written movingly and eloquently about multiple identities, being a Muslim in Europe. Questions of identity and difference have also been deeply existential for Christians, trying to live out the scriptural injunction to be in the world, but not of the world. Now, I think we should be aware of differences here today in terms of cultural power and different vulnerabilities facing each of our traditions. In this country, and for much of the history of this university, there's been a tendency to conflate being Christian with being American in the nation's service, or the other way around, being American with being Christian. Perhaps it's healthy for Christians to now also ask themselves how their religious identity relates to a civic one. Facing that question is one that Christians and Muslims share in common, claiming their political identity without being made to feel like second-class citizens because of their religion. We talked over lunch about what I saw as the courageous stance of Colin Powell when there was continued public discourse about whether President Obama is a Muslim. And when he said, what would it matter if he was? Now, I'm aware that the president is under constraints with regard to his own religious identity. But I think there hasn't been enough conversation of that kind. I think there is common ground among religions, common challenges in the modern world. How might a Christian or a Muslim respond to such challenges, precisely as Christians or as Muslims? What constitutes legitimate reform and what abandons fundamental beliefs and practices in a way that accommodates to a secular culture? What is central to our traditions and what is peripheral or culturally contingent? Who has the authority to judge particular cases? How do we bring our texts together with our current context? I think those are questions that face both traditions. Now, our particular theme today is difficult not only because of the scope of injustice in our world, but the complex role of religious communities, as Dean Paul mentioned, in promoting and combating oppression. I might also add a third, allowing oppression, being complicit with it by remaining silent. I worry our capacity to engage religious forms of life in all of their diversity is constrained by abstraction, or a triumphalism where the past is recalled solely to justify the present, or the best of liberalism is contrasted with the worst of religion, or a secular moral panic that seeks to criminalize religious practices. I have a lot to learn about Islamic theology. But at lunch today, I also mentioned a recent survey which revealed how much religious illiteracy there is in the United States about Christianity. My favorite finding is that 15% of Americans think Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. 75% of Americans think the Bible teaches God helps those who help themselves. That's Ben Franklin. Actually, an American maxim that's deeply at odds, I think, with central tenets of Christianity. I confess I am a wary but willing defender of much of what goes by the name of social contract liberalism, the constitutional rule of law, limited government, respect for civil liberty, the separateness of persons, democratic arrangements, resistance to various forms of domination by groups or individuals over others. Indeed, I do so as a Christian, finding in these ideas and practices core implications of my faith. It took a long time for Christians to think that it is God's will that we don't kill each other over disagreements about God's will. I take Christianity and Islam to be living traditions, visions of what is good, beautiful, and true in human experience, capable of shaping people who love and people who hate, capable of justice and injustice, creativity and destruction. Muslim civilizations have a long history of pluralist political communities that afford basic rights to non-Muslims, though I do hope we can talk about the distinctive challenges now facing both traditions, including acts of injustice against women and non-Muslim religious people in majority Muslim countries, including Christians, but also perhaps guest workers in the Gulf states. What does the Islamic tradition have to say about social justice for them? I think of religions often as foreign languages with deep arguments about the proper way to speak that language. They are ongoing debates, kind of like our families have debates about what it means to be a part of that family. Let me read some passages from the Bible, the primary source of Christian ethics and its fundamental grammar. As you listen, try to imagine we're not in a posh lecture hall in Princeton. Picture yourself in a tar paper shack in Mexico City, perhaps a Paris suburb or Trenton, or the Superdome in New Orleans after Katrina. Very quickly, from Isaiah, "He has sent me to bind the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives, the opening of the prison to those who are bound. For I, the Lord, love justice." From Exodus, "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard their outcry against their slave masters. Thus says the Lord, let my people go." From Jeremiah, "Woe unto him who builds his house by unrighteousness and his upper rooms by injustice, who makes his neighbor serve him for nothing and does not give him his wages." Finally, from the Gospel of Matthew, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. A second is like it. You shall love the neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." Christian ethics, I think, is a tradition that tries to live out these teachings, thinking about ends and means, linking spirituality to the pursuit of earthly justice by tracking this deep interconnection between the love of God and the love of neighbor and of love's relation to justice. It's always been practical. The church has had to answer questions. Is it justifiable for a Christian to participate in violence or the use of lethal force in order to protect innocent others? How is a hungry peasant stealing a loaf of bread different than a wealthy banker charging excessive interest on the poor? But I don't think either Islamic or Christian ethics is just about what we do or don't do. Fundamentally, it's about who we are or who we want to be and the vision of a society we want to live in. Perhaps most profoundly seen in the lives of saints, people like Martin Luther King Jr., who was mentioned, or Mother Teresa, the lessons we might learn from those who were inspired by their faith to support movements like abolitionism, or various movements that respond to patterns of economic, political, and cultural oppression. I want to end my time with 3 very brief snapshots that might help orient our discussion. I spent a lot of time in the 5th century wrestling with a mystic and master psychologist, Augustine of Hippo. Despite being a middle-class kid from the cultural margins of North Africa, he became the public intellectual of the later Roman Empire. He had multiple identities himself, and he sought to address a basic question: what does it mean to be a Christian and a Roman? Answering the charge that Christians were responsible for the fall of Rome, he claimed that the pagans had made the empire their religion and warned Christians not to make the same mistake. He became a great critic of the ideology of Roman imperialism. He was concerned about the corruption of religion by politics. Perhaps we're more concerned with the corruption of politics by religion. He's not a usual figure in the list of Christians committed to social justice, though he did much to practically invent the Christian tradition of just war. He's been called the first great realist in Western political history. Augustine would have appreciated President Obama's Nobel Peace Prize speech, a hope for justice that was tempered by realism. In his view, Augustine, justice is a good for which human beings have an infinite desire but a limited capacity to achieve. Desire for justice is a form of desire for God, which in all of its forms has the power to destroy us as it offers us life. I think this is an interesting connection to the language of intention, concerns about not whether we should engage the world, but how we engage the world. That was Augustine's big question. He worried about turning the world on fire by claims of purity in this life. Purification of the heart was central to him, but it was always an ongoing struggle, which would find rest only at the end of history, when God establishes God's kingdom. He could be rather gloomy. I thought of this when Professor Ramadan said, "Oppression is the nature of life." Augustine talked about this life as hell on earth. But he read the Bible not simply as a tragedy, those words we heard, not only a never-ending story about sin that deflates our ambition to combat oppression. The goodness of creation was deeper than the fall. He thought we should not be in awe of oppression. It was not as strong as God's goodness. It is not as real as the good. Only someone in love with the world, I think, could describe oppression in the way he does. Perhaps most importantly, he was responsible for spreading a language of love as emotional investment with those who suffer wrongdoing. In fact, daringly, much to the dismay of some theologians, he said the 2 commandments, love of God and love of neighbor, cannot exist without each other. Piety and justice were intimately linked. The problem, he thought, was not that we love too little, but we love too much in the wrong ways. We're overwhelmed by our desire for justice, and we try to grasp at it in ways that dominate others. The City of God is 1,000 pages long. Here's the 5-second version. Christians are pilgrims on earth, leaving the world's political struggles sometimes opaque. Law should not and cannot do everything to promote morality. But Augustine resisted a dour dualism. We are called to love God and our neighbors, giving them their due as fellow creatures in the image of God, with a special duty to protect the vulnerable. Given the history of Christian crusades of love, often violent, I suspect some people get nervous when a Christian tells them they're going to love them. But I think there's something profound, and this gets at the question of Professor Ramadan about human nature. For Christians, especially Augustine, human beings are fundamentally bundles of loves, not just collections of strategic interests. He broke from a classical philosophy that was worried about emotions as disturbing our rationality. And I think it's a break with radical implications for politics. It was a cultural watershed. If Augustine had not begun this reevaluation, we would live, at least in the West, in a very different world. He furnished a deeply humanitarian ethic premised on concern for the suffering of others. His legacy, to be sure, was mixed. He affirmed the value of the world, even a kind of secularity in what he called the time between the times, the time waiting for the second coming of Christ. But this imagination vexed a lot of the Middle Ages, tempting it to close on in itself, fusing the religious and the secular. For Augustine, however, history is not just waiting for God to return. It's a time where we learn to train our loves, learning to desire well, perhaps educated generosity. The language of jihad is connected, I think, or analogous in Augustine, to ordering our loves, aspiring for excellence, but discipline. I have a question about humility, but I think I'll save that towards the end because I want to wrap up. I'm going to jump now to the 20th century, two modern Augustinians, much quicker. Liberation theology. Some of you may have heard that word. The word liberation comes in Professor Ramadan's book. Refers not to an academic kind of theology, but a way of doing theology that emerged in the Christian church in Latin America in the 1960s and the 1970s, under the influence of a Peruvian priest, Gustavo Gutierrez. Gutierrez sought to integrate Christian beliefs with an ancient Christian protest against oppression that we heard in those passages from the Bible. Karl Marx thought religion was the opiate of the people, a sleepy drug that promises otherworldly salvation. I'm sure you've heard of that in terms of Christians not caring about anything except their own salvation, or maybe a couple of pet issues like abortion and homosexuality. But Marx, perhaps more positively, also said religion expressed the sigh of the oppressed creature. The sigh of the oppressed creature. Like Augustine, Gutierrez said the two love commands form the center of Christian life. But Gutierrez worried that too much of Christianity, perhaps under the influence of Augustine as well, was focused on personal piety, separated from concern for social justice. Traditional theology, he said, reduces the biblical story to the vertical, the eternal dimension of an individual's relation to God, up there, out there in heaven. But for Gutierrez, because God enters time in the incarnation, to know God is to do justice on earth. Indeed, he called the neighbor a sacrament of God. Conversion is not just about getting right with God, but to God's creatures. Faith must be actualized in love. Most importantly, Gutierrez argues Christians should avoid the pitfalls of individualistic charity. They must recognize persons in light of the structures that oppress them. And the struggle for social justice, he said, is the struggle for the kingdom of God. A very different vision than Augustine. A third, which I end. Like Augustine and Gutierrez, Martin Luther King believed that what a society loves is a sign of what kind of society it will be. Does it love peace or does it love violence? King represents an incredible mix of various traditions: the black church tradition, liberal Protestantism, the Gandhian method of nonviolent social change, and a particular kind of American civil religion that celebrates the democratic ideals of America as unfulfilled promises. Unlike Nietzsche, who thought that Christian love was weak, a form of revenge by the powerless against the powerful, King saw love as a force for social change that could be used by oppressed people in their struggle for freedom. King was raised in a very evangelical Christian tradition that focused on personal piety and did not think the church was to be an agent of social change. But King would write, "The gospel at its best deals with the whole man, not only his soul, but also his body, not only his spiritual well-being, but his material well-being. A religion that professes concern for the souls of men and is not concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them is a spiritually moribund religion." King's Jesus not only changes hearts, as George W. Bush famously declared in a presidential debate, but focuses our attention on the abused, the weak, the outsiders of history. And King knew that public institutions and law matter. But he also knew the habits and virtues of a people lay at the foundation of politics. Many opposed democracy in the name of religion, Some oppose religion in the name of democracy. King, I think, is a radical Democrat and a radical Christian. Let me end. These ideals, these lives, no doubt have their counterparts in the Islamic tradition. But I do worry that a modern project of purifying religions to find their ethical essence and then privatizing spirituality strikes me as unhelpful in the long run if it requires abandoning the deepest sources of our religious traditions, denying their differences and their social presence as communities. Dialogue is necessary, sometimes behind closed doors within our own communities where we have a lot of internal conflict, but also in public. In fact, I think we need to talk more about religion in public, not less. Much of modern thought promises us rationality and self-reliance. But I fear too much of our culture is childish, anxious, intellectually tired to meet the demands of our age. Much depends on whether or not our generation, especially the undergraduates, will find ways to think about and practice religious faith in ways that sustain justice rather than injustice. Much depends on whether or not our generation can desire justice without killing each other. Much depends on whether we can help our traditions move beyond vague but ineffective concern for justice, paralyzing despair, mild guilt about the state of the world, or simply losing ourselves in spiritual journeys. There's a lot of talk about religion today. Religion is chic, perhaps the abuse of religion. What I think we need to think harder about is how does social change actually happen? What is it that is really hard to change? I don't have an answer that fits on a bumper sticker, but one thing I think I know is that we can't give up on each other, lest we worsen the conflicts that threaten to tear humanity apart today. I look forward to our dialogue.
Thank you both very much. I am just going to use this opportunity to encourage you to turn on your lavalier mics. And then what I'd like is for each of you to offer or present one or two questions that each of your talks has brought up for you, and start that way. Okay? So does that sound fair?
Yeah.
One or two questions?
So just, yeah, and then we can go back and forth, and, you know,
Okay.
organic.
Now I have two questions, which is really, the first one is about you didn't touch this, you were talking about the three examples, in fact, of positioning from St. Augustine and theologian, liberation theology, and Martin Luther King Jr. And my position is this one, is that what we got very often from the diversity of the Christian trends is a very theoretical discussion on peace and God is love. And we have a long tradition of just war. Now this connection, because when you talk with liberation theology, they are very much resisting to what is coming from the Roman Catholic Church. In the Protestant tradition, you have different voices as well. Mm-hmm. And my question is this one: is there something today that you can see coming mainly from southern countries, being able to deal with war and violence, but also something which has to do with economics? Because I remember someone in Burkina Faso telling me, you know, all this business about violence and killing innocent people, we are against this, we condemn that. He was a Burkinabe Christian guy, but he told me, in fact, there is something which is happening day in, day out, and we are facing this, which is a non-violent economic terrorism. that we are being killed, and our people are killed, and this is in fact not, and it's oppression, it's economic oppression. So is there something which is a theory that we have? And the last point is, what is your take on, because I went there, I spent time with liberation theologians. I went to see Donald Camara, and I spoke with him about this. He impressed me a lot. I find many things that he was always talking about love, but he's saying, I'm not going to give up on justice. It's the two are going together. And for me is, what is your take on this discussion today on liberation theology? Because very often we have a sense that liberation theology is on the margin of the Christian mainstream discourse.
I think that's very much true, and has actually lost, I'll say in maybe in North America and in Europe, its perceived association with Marxism and socialism has led to its further marginalization. But I take the point that a lot of Christian social ethics in the United States in the early 20th century was about economics. In the past 40 years, there's been a lot of attention to bioethics, questions of war, race and gender, which are often bound up with economic issues. But I do think the Christian tradition now faces a kind of renewed demand to think about economics. There is a lot of discussion today about the dangers of consumerism. But I worry that that can just become a kind of language about personal virtues. And I think what the point of liberation theology, whether or not you agree with its economic analysis, is to say we need to rethink not just consumerism, but the very structures of exchange that render us complicit with injustice. And how to do that. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about the nation state, but there is a turn now to think of the market and how either the Islamic or the Christian tradition could think about market economies that are not oriented only towards profit but social ends. So there are Christian movements, for example, in Britain and in America against usury, which I tell my undergraduates, they're not sure what that means, but it was the biggest sin of the Middle Ages in the Christian tradition. They've never heard of it. There are movements now to think about, and this gets to how do we bring this lovely theory to practice. So there's a grassroots movement of Christians, often working actually with Muslims, to force credit card companies to reduce their interest rates to something, there's a debate about how low, 10%. Okay? That gets into those discriminations about how we determine concrete issues. But I think that's an example that is, not let's have another debate about capitalism versus socialism, but looking at a specific issue. We may need that debate about a kind of different kind of market economy. But I think you're right to tap into it is a current weakness. There's a lot of moral protest, but not a lot of hard thinking. And this is where I think we need economists or others to think about their religious identity in light of these practices. So, and a lot of that still does come from the South, though there is a movement today. I think also when you mentioned the division of charity and justice, this is true in the United States. I was struck in the response to our disaster in Katrina. The first people there, often in the greatest numbers, were conservative American Christians, capable of tremendous compassion, delivering food. Yet, often seeing that as the limit of their duty, rather than trying to think about the structures that may have permitted and allowed the excessive injustice of what happened. So thinking about love and justice as not in opposition to one another, but as coordinated, I think is very important. Your question about Augustine versus liberation theology raises a question, two questions for me, if I could ask as well. You mentioned, and I think Christianity and Islam share an emphasis on compassion, and also you used the word humility. I think also a word we haven't used is obedience. Many critics think that humility can become a vice. a kind of willingness to tolerate humiliation, accept oppression, suffering as a part of God's plan. Christians, for example, have long wondered about the tension between turning the other cheek and righteous anger. So how do you understand the relation between submission and submissiveness within the Islamic tradition with a call for liberation? Are there acceptable forms of oppression? How do we resist despair? I guess given the centrality of submission, I'm trying to think about how that would work within the Islamic tradition and how it might relate to how Christians could think about it.
That's a good one. No, it's a good one because I really think, I have been working within the Muslim communities, and even what I'm saying is that one of our challenges and one of our duties as Muslims, talking in different languages, from Arabic to English to French to all the other languages, and I'm tackling this issue in Radical Reform, but also in another book, The Quest for Meaning, and trying to develop this sense of pluralism. Is the very essence of the dialogue is to get a very deep understanding of the notion that we are using. And for years myself, when I was to translate Islam, I was saying it's submission or surrender. And then I changed. I wrote a book on the messenger, peace be upon him, and I wrote this book and I changed, saying, no, in fact, it's wrong. The real understanding of what Islam is, if you come to the root of the word, is not this kind of submission. Submission in English doesn't mean Islam in Arabic. Islam in Arabic means something which is to enter in God's peace. ادخلوا في السلم كافة is something that, which is exactly it, is to go from these tensions to peace with Him. And to be at peace with Him is to be at peace with yourself. And this is where the very essence of Islam is, in fact, and this is why I'm saying I said this to, by the way, the State Department, by saying we have a problem with the concept of jihad. I say, I'm sorry, you have to deal with it. Because the concept of jihad is central to what I'm saying. To enter in God's peace is to go through the jihad process, which is struggling, striving to educate yourself to get that peace. So peace is at the end of the jihad process. So it's exactly the opposite of surrender without just, is to enter with your heart, and you understand that with your heart you are going to strive, that to enter in God's peace is a question of education, and it's two things: resisting the bad and reforming for the better. So this two-way process. And I would say that this is the very essence of Islam.
Yeah. So those Muslims who think of jihad as not just a collective duty, but an individual duty to protect the peace of the Dar es Salaam are mistaken?
It's one dimension of it. It's not the whole dimension, and I would say that when they speak about only resisting and protecting Dar es Salaam is a very, very narrow understanding of what it is. Because at the end of the day, the very understanding of jihad, and sometimes qital, which is the word when it comes to armed resistance, is wherever you are, you have to go through two jihads. The first one is a personal and intimate one that I was talking about. And then it's a jihad for more justice where you are. It's a jihad against oppression. So you have to be aware of all these dimensions. So for example, any American citizen, anyone who is in this society struggling for more justice here, more equality here, against the oppression of women here, is acting a jihad, an American jihad against poverty, against discrimination, and this is the way you act against oppression. So the intrinsic dimension of oppression that could happen if we are not aware of it means that we have to be always spiritually aware that there is a jihad to promote against the things. For example, in Mauritius, we were talking in an interfaith dialogue, and the people were scared about the concept of jihad, and we launched something which was a new concept, is jihad against poverty. Understanding that the enemy is poverty is oppressing people. So this is, you are resisting this kind of oppression. and this is a jihad as well. So all this business that we have now with people saying the call for jihad is to go and kill innocent Americans or innocent Muslims, this is for us not only non-Islamic, it's anti-Islamic. It's against the very essence of our religion, and we have to speak out. And this is why I appreciated in your talk is listening to you is during your talk this capacity of self-criticism, which is, okay, these are our values, but we don't always meet our standards and our values. And I think that this is also something which is the starting point of a very important intellectual jihad. And the intellectual jihad is don't compare your values or your ideals with the practices of the others, because this is unfair and unjust.
So that raises an interesting question I also had, and this comes from some things you said, but also reading your book, Radical Reform. I guess this is just out of intellectual curiosity. How do I understand what's radical about it? And how radical is it in relation to previous efforts in modernist, reformist Islamic thought? Is it the conclusions you draw about particular issues? Or is it more in the method or the way in which you're trying to kind of lift up ethical principles? I mean, I guess I wasn't clear at times if you're suggesting that traditional Islamic jurisprudence got the Quran wrong, or whether or not it's more about kind of lifting up these fundamental aims in light of new contexts. And I have questions about our new context in light of the recent Middle East events in the Middle East, about whether or not you think Islamic political thought is compatible with something like a social contract rather than a covenant between Allah and the nation or something like that. I guess this is a general, this may sound terribly theoretical, but I'm just wondering what's radical about it. And also what's Islamic about it, but that's a big question.
Wow. Okay. Okay, how much time I have to answer?
30 seconds. 30 seconds. Then you can ask me how God can be 3 in 1, and I'll answer it in 15 seconds.
Okay. Okay, so you have my next question. That's fine. Look, exactly the way you were talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where you said something which was very interesting. He was a radical Democrat and a radical Christian. And what I'm saying is this kind of radical reform, in which way we come to the center, to the heart of a tradition, and we look at it. And I'm not saying that the whole tradition was wrong. I'm saying they answered questions for that time with a specific methodology that was suitable, and we have to study this. Now we are facing a world where all this complexity, you can't just come with, okay, you know what, after the economic crisis, we have an answer, Islamic economy. Yeah. And you come with something which is, we have means, but we don't have an alternative model. Yeah. My point is really to ask the question, which kind of Islamic ethics do we have for the current economy? Which kind of Islamic ethics do we have for the current medical science or any experimental science, bioethics, for example, the field that you are working with, or on gender? When you speak about equality, what does it mean in our society? The societies are much more complex, and the radical reform is two things. To go from an adaptational reform to a transformational reform. What the scholars are doing today is that they are adapting to the world the way the world is. And I don't understand that my religion is telling me, as you were saying, exactly the same way you were talking here. What I understood from what you were saying is that at the end of the day, your understanding of Christianity is to change this world for the better. We are exactly on the same path here. Is my understanding of Islam is not to reform to adapt, is to reform to change this world for the better. Less injustice, less oppression, less marginalization, and even less consumerism in the way we are facing it. So it's really a transformational reform. But the radical change here is to go to something which is, for me, important, a shift in the center of gravity of authority in Islam. And this is something which is going to be very difficult, is to say to the scholars of the text, you can't today give us the final answers to the world if you are not working with people knowing what the world is, what sciences are, what economy is. If not, you are just going to adapt to the order of the economy, and what we have now as Islamic economy is some scholars telling us we want the same result with other means. Halal means for the same ends. I'm saying, but that's not what I want. Yeah. I want to challenge the ends in order that we have to know how to use the means. So this is the, you know, I don't like something which is, I said this to the young Muslims yesterday, halal capitalism or halal consumerism. I think these are contradictions in terms. You have to think about how do you get to equality in the free market, which kind of regulations. And this is the radicality of it, which is to say, in fact, to say to the ordinary Muslims and the specialists in many fields, stop being childish in your religious tradition. Come with your expertise and challenge the answers that you get, because at the end of the day, you will have the answers you deserve. So this is the point.
This is too important to leave to the theologians, I think.
This is a Christian take.
This is a Christian take. No, I wasn't referring to the Islamic self-criticism. No, no. I think I was talking about my beloved Saint Augustine. He said slavery was a wicked form of commerce. But his historical imagination couldn't imagine any other form of economic life. And I think today you're right to think that we do have this complexity and growth in the social sciences and other disciplines that demands religious people who have knowledge of things of that kind to kind of grow up in terms of bringing together their religious identity. I'm often struck, we talked at lunch today about how incredibly bright certain, say, religious students are in their discipline, and yet their knowledge of their religious tradition is limited to what 100 years ago a third grader might have had. And I'm not saying that to kind of critique or kind of blame, not to blame them, because I wouldn't blame them. I would blame the religious communities for their lack of education, of very bright students. On the other hand, I don't think the students should be so intimidated by how hard theology might be. If you can kind of write a senior thesis in Comp Lit, you can, if you can get in a C in your engineering class, you can read theology enough to think about this integration. But I think that does raise the question of authority. If I could just ask one more question, and then we'll open it up. Oh, okay.
But I also have one to you.
Okay.
Which is not about the Trinity. Or the power of Trinity.
Well, okay. I'll be very concise. I'm a Protestant, so I could tell you what I think. But the question about authority, and this is just out of personal curiosity, in some ways, you've been called a Muslim Martin Luther, which I don't know if you take that as a term of praise or not, but within Christianity, there's long-standing debates about the way in which the Protestant Reformation splintered Christians and led to a loss of authority. I guess how are you often appeal to the authority of the ulama? Are you included in that? Are you a religious authority, or what kind of voice you have in the Muslim world? Just it's helpful for Christians to kind of understand what that would mean. Yeah.
No, I went through the training of what a alim is, with what we have. I didn't went through Al-Azhar as an institution, but through what we call al-ijazat. So it's traditional one-to-one, and the sheikh is giving you the authority to teach at one point in 7 different fields. So in the classical traditional thing is a alim has to go through this. So what I'm saying from where I am is that what I want is the shift in these authorities to say now, it's clear that when we speak about Islamic ethics, the scholars, the alim, or the ulama, are going to have the final word on, this is right according to the text. But I want them to be challenged by the knowledge, the other authority from within. And this is the critical point. which is not to dismiss the ulama, but to ask all the other, and I don't call them, you know, we have in Arabic 2 words that are showing a state of authority. El-ulama as, you know, people of the text, and el-mutakhassis is a specialist, or el-khabir, or someone who is a specialist. But the khabir or el-mutakhassis has not the same level of authority when it comes to applied ethics. Why, when you come to the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء, you have a concept which is here used in the Quran saying the people who are the more God conscious are the more knowledgeable, the ulama. But the ulama is generic. It's not the scholars of the text. It's all the people of knowledge. And I think that, and even the connection in the text is connected to the knowledge of nature. It's connected to the way you look at nature and you understand nature. Look, for the last, and you know this, we are now just 10 years after September 11th, and many times I have been asked as a Muslim scholar coming from within the tradition, you have to say something about the way the people are resisting violence or promoting violence. So condemning September, I was 1 week after what happened here, I said this is anti-Islamic. I said it not only in Western, you know, settings where we are talking about what happened in New York or in Madrid or in London, but also we have to say the same in Casablanca, in Jordan, and in Iraq today. I think we have an ethical ground is to put all the people at the same level and to understand terrorism is touching all the people in the southern countries as well. And I think that there is a necessity and a moral duty for Muslims to be clear on this, that you can agree sometimes that the resistance, for example, for me, the Palestinian resistance is legitimate. They have to struggle for their rights because they are oppressed. But to kill innocent people, I am not accepting the means, but the struggle for itself, I say these people are the dignity. And if in the United States of America or in European countries, all the resistance in history were praised because they were the dignity of the country. So we have to decide on the means now and to condemn some of the means. The point for me is, I heard the President Bush and then Tony Blair telling us that at the end of the day, what they are doing is connected to a specific relation with God from a Christian tradition, and it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Why? Because this is where I think that from a Christian viewpoint, for us in a dialogue, is to take a very clear stand on this. Okay. That from a Christian viewpoint, what is your take when someone is saying that God bless America and America is going to kill innocent people? Or Tony Blair, now, let me tell you something. Tony Blair now has a foundation for interfaith dialogue. They call me to come. I can't. I feel I can't. Morally, I can't go to this organization because what he said before is to justify through his relationship with God that he thought that his relationship with God was telling him, go and do what you are doing. And I would say that sometimes I don't get from Christians a clear discourse saying something about this, because we are asked as Muslims, you have to, and as Christians, where are the voices that are saying from within the civil society as Christians, this is anti-Christianity?
I will say that the Iraq War had less support by religious Christian communities than any war in the history of the United States. In fact, there was only really one body that was somewhat ambiguous. But I take the point about the mobilization of Christian rhetoric as something that Christians themselves need to more strongly oppose and protest.
But what can we do for that? Because I really think that I'm asked as a Muslim, scholar, intellectuals, you have to teach this. And my sense is that when it comes to what you said, for example, about the petromonarchies and the way the immigrants and the people are treated, this is completely right, that the Muslims should speak, that you can't just in the name of, we have immigrants, Muslims and Christians that are oppressed in the rich countries, and this is unacceptable. We have to say it and we have to be clear, because at the end of the day, the starting point of non-violence against oppression is to speak out. Our silence is promoting violence, so at the end of the day, we have to speak if we are serious about that. But the point is that very often from where we are, in the name that there is a distinction, we are in a secular society, sometimes some are using religion and the religious voices are not there. So I'm just asking why and how can we do something for the Christian voices to be more vocal when things wrong are done in their name?
Yeah. I have an answer, but Paul's silencing me, so I will. No, that's right.
Silencing another Christian voice.
Repeating the entire history of Christianity.
I know it. I know it. No, I will say that President Bush refused to meet with his own bishop who was coming out against the war, before the war. The president, you know, the head of his own tradition came out against the war. He refused to meet with him. So there was a lot of that. I don't have time for a question, do I? One? Okay. I just wanted to one question about this is I'm gonna make it broad so you can answer it however you want. Where is the question of the equivalency of salvation with working for against oppression? And another way to take that is there an apocalyptic or eschatological tension around oppression that makes itself so that it is not a convenient question, but an urgent one and a necessary one? So I think that a lot of what I'm trying to get at is, where is the necessity? Where's the of religion and oppression in both traditions?
Do you want to begin? Just very quickly.
That's enough.
No. Cognizant of time.
I like your answer.
There's a big debate in Christian theology about whether there's redemption in history or only the redemption of history. And I think that tension is a conflict internal to the Christian faith. And a lot of it has to do within Augustine's thought himself. All is grace. Our salvation is not earned by whether or not we raise our voice against oppression. But I think for Augustine, we only actually become trained and capable of worshiping God well by working for justice. So there is a link, though this is a debate, but I'll stand on the side of those who there is an urgency, but at the end of the day, it is God's gift. But that is not meant to deflate the necessity of working for justice.
From from within the Islamic tradition, I would say that this is exactly the way you were putting it. It's a necessity. That the fact that we are here as Muslim is exactly this. In fact, why are you elected from a spiritual viewpoint? Not as a community per se with your blood, but as the spiritual essence of it. كنت خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. You are the best community insofar it's a condition. You promote what is right and you resist what is bad. There is no other way. Your spirituality should be visible in the way you resist what is bad and you promote what is wrong. And this is a necessity. There is no salvation in the Muslim mindset if you don't go through this. And this is wherever you go. And what is bad is not only what is bad for Muslims, is what is bad for the human brotherhood. It's for all the human beings. And what is right should be the same for everything. So this is where, for example, the necessity is so huge that, for example, when I speak about ethics, about citizenship, and I'm saying, look, Muslims, you are Muslim Americans, you are citizens in this country. But I'm not only speaking about citizenship. I'm saying there is an ethics of citizenship. It's your duties where you should be contributing against discrimination, against oppression. You can't be true Muslim American if your face is not visible in the public sphere. And I completely agree with what you said. This business of trying to put religion invisible in the public sphere and just to ask for the people, you know what? That's all good that you are religious people. Work on solidarity. Do what the state cannot do. Just go on the margin and just spread love on the margin while spreading oppression in the middle. I think that this is not acceptable. So I would say that this is the essence of our religion, and this is what I'm saying to the Muslims. It could be a gift that with your presence in this kind of dialogue with Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and Hindus, and all the people of spirituality, you bring back this necessity of resistance to any oppression in the civil society. I would say that this is the common future that we have to share.
Thank you very much.
I would like to thank very much the wonderful panelists, Eric, Gregory, and Tariq Ramadan, and our wonderful moderator, Paul Rauschenbusch. As they say, all good things must come to an end, so this particular conversation has come to an end. But before you leave, I want to recognize that there are almost 400 people in this room of different faiths, from different cultures, from different backgrounds, and so it is important for us to be in dialogue as well and to model ourselves after this wonderful dialogue on stage. I have one very important request to make, and that is that Dr. Ramadan and his family have to catch a flight. And therefore, I request everybody to remain seated while Dr. Ramadan and his family leave the room. But before that, we are very honored to be able, through the Muslim Life program, to show our gratitude by offering a piece of calligraphy to each of our speakers and panelists. And this calligraphy piece is actually produced by a local artist by the name of Faraz Khan. Is Faraz here? Faraz, you're here somewhere. Okay, well, just clap for him anyways. Okay. So this lovely piece here is for Dr. Tariq Ramadan, and it's a Persian poem of Rumi that talks about knowing God. And this beautiful piece here is about being a lighthouse for illumination and knowledge, and this is for our dear colleague, Paul Rauschenbusch. And last but not least, this is a piece similar to Tariq Ramadan's about knowing God, and also a beautiful poem of Rumi's for our very own Dr. Eric Gregory. So if you can just practice a moment or two of compassion and allow Dr. Ramadan to exit the stage so he can make his flight. Thank you so much. One very final announcement is that tomorrow, which is Thursday, at 4:30 p.m. in Frisch 302, we're going to show a documentary film called Real Bad Arabs. And it's a portrayal of Arabs and Muslims in the media since many, many decades. And there's also going to be a wonderful panel discussion, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. in Frisch 302 tomorrow, Thursday. So please be there for that as well. Thank you so much for coming. You have been a wonderful audience. Thank you.